Include now. Brought to you by Even Break.
Hello and welcome back to another episode of the Include Now After Pod, or as we like to call it here, Community Corner. I am very thrilled to say that joining us soon after their wonderful podcast talking on e-learning, I am joined by Leah and Adam. Thank you very much for joining me. Like as someone that's certainly guilty of putting a lot of colours on a boring presentation, it was very interesting to learn why that's an awful plan. So so thank you very much. So if you're not familiar with what happened in Community Corner, I asked our guests a couple of things that the community would like to know. So kicking it off, like the first one is, what is your all-time favourite example of inclusive design or product design?
So when I read this question, what sprang to mind was earlier this year I got to visit the RNIB's Grimaldi building in London. First time I've been there, I really want to go back for a full tour. But so when the RNIB were working on sort of designing the building, they wanted it to be a beacon of accessibility.
Cool.
Not just for people with sight loss, obviously a significant proportion of their staff and volunteers have sight loss, but also for people with neurodiversity, a range of different things. And it's the kind of space you go in and you think, oh, why doesn't everyone do this? This is so simple but so effective. So things like there are coloured pathways leading you to different parts of the building. Really easy to follow. I've seen pictures of the kitchens and all the cupboards and the fridges and things are labelled, and they're in braille and they're in text. And what we were saying before about accessible and inclusive design is just better design. How many times have you gone into a kitchen for the first time and you don't know where anything is? You don't know where the cups are, you don't know where the tea bags are, and you open every door trying to find it. And I just thought, what a brilliant idea. They've got quiet spaces, they've got spaces where you can adjust the lighting, dedicated areas for quiet work and different, teamwork and different kinds of things. And beyond that, so, building itself is obviously really great in lots of ways, but actually the location, so part of the reason they chose that location was that it's close to King's Cross, and it's a straight line from King's Cross to the building, which is really great. Makes it so much easier to find. And it makes me think about, education and training. Often we focus on, say, the course itself, that we're designing, but actually the whole learner journey needs to be accessible and inclusive. And in higher education, they have this phrase, from ad to grad. From the first time you encounter an advert for a university, right through to graduating and thinking about your career options, every part of that should be accessible. And I think people forget that. So I love the Grimaldi building for being a kind of physical manifestation of
Yeah.
that.
No, because I think that's like really cool. Because what you kind of touched on during the podcast, where you said that when you're creating something, like the very first things that you might think of is like something that like impacts you, and like you just then talking, saying that it's one long road to King's Cross. So one of like Adam and I, we have a colleague that's blind, like it was only when I was guiding him around London that like I just realised how inaccessible quite a lot of it is, and certainly the like travelling part too. So I think for them to like even incorporate like the travel and not just the places are really sort of cool, way to think on something too.
Yeah, absolutely.
And just leading on further with what the community would like to know. So, like the next two kind of crossover, where it's how do I become a learning designer, and where can you learn more accessible e-learning design as well?
Okay. Yeah. This is an interesting one. So learning design, I've always said learning design is kind of a weird area to work in. In a way it's brilliant because it's very diverse. People have come from all different backgrounds. So there are people who've been teachers or tutors, people who've worked in libraries and information services, people who have background in design or multimedia. All of these different kind of skill sets and backgrounds and things all come together. And like I say, that can be brilliant. It can be quite challenging as well. And often, certainly when, kind of 12, 13, 14 years ago, when I was getting into learning design initially, it could be challenging because everyone had their own approach, maybe hadn't had formal training or education around how to make learning effective. That there's even now there's still a lot of guesswork in learning design. We like to talk about it like it's a science. There is research, there is research into what can make learning effective, but it's limited and it's really hard to generalize. So it's just this kind of strange field, really. I think now, for people now who are looking at coming into it as a line of work, there are more courses. There are university courses that you can do. There are online courses that you can do to try and sort of come into it that way. But yeah, it means that people have different levels of knowledge about things like accessibility because they maybe haven't encountered it before.
Cool.
So it's a bit of a melting pot.
Yeah.
For me, I won't give you my whole life story, but I did languages at university. I knew I wanted to work in education. I worked in a primary school, getting covered in glue and glitter. Thought I maybe would be a teacher. Decided against. That wasn't for me. And then I thought I would work in educational publishing, like, textbooks. And really it was an accident that I got into e-learning. I applied for all of these jobs, got quite disheartened. And in the end, the job that I landed when I was sort of 22, 23 was with a company that made online courses for universities.
Okay.
And that was how I got into it. But I think I was saying to you before we started recording, I think of myself as working in education and training, even though probably 75-80% of what I do now is e-learning. I think of it as broader than that.
Yeah. Cool.
So that's how I got into it. And then the second question, how can you learn more about e-learning and accessibility?
Yes.
I think we kind of touched on this when we were talking earlier, following people. So following people on, say, LinkedIn, for example, you can learn a huge amount. Yeah. There are so many brilliant people who are sharing tips, they're sharing techniques. As we were saying, not everyone is an expert, or perhaps an expert to the extent that they think they are, or that they present themselves as. But so having that broad range of people that you follow and engage with is really important. There's also, so one of the people that I follow is a lady called Susie Miller. She has written, I was going to say a book, I mean it's kind of the book actually, on accessibility in e-learning. So it's called Designing Accessible Learning Content, and I think I'm right in saying that there's just been a new edition come out. Okay. That is incredibly helpful. That's like my go-to. I'm forever taking it off the shelf and checking things, because although you've got the WCAG guidelines there, the irony with WCAG I think is that they're not particularly accessible themselves. They're not presented in the most user-friendly language actually. So having something like Susie's book that can help you interpret the guidelines and translate them into practical actions, I find incredibly helpful.
I think sometimes WCAG, I think it's come a long way. And also sometimes a difference between a standard and best practice. Yeah. And then the standard and best practice are quite different levels. Yeah, absolutely. So yeah.
Well, thank you very much for answering what our community wanted to know. And it's now the time where you get to ask Adam and I something too.
Okay, I'll go easy on you.
Okay.
So I would love to know, I'll give you a choice. I would love to know either a really bad learning experience or a really good learning experience that you've had. It doesn't have to be e-learning. It could be, from lectures at university or anything. But it's really interesting to me as a learning designer to hear about the highs and lows that people have experienced.
Ooh. So this is more related to in-person learning, but when I was at university, because I certainly remember the courses and the lessons where the person that was teaching it, you could easily tell whether it was their passion or they were just the person that kind of got chosen to teach it. So I would say quite a lot of my positive experiences when learning something certainly come from the sort of personality and the passion of the person rather than always the content of what they're teaching as well.
Interesting. And it's interesting because I think sometimes people worry that with e-learning you lose that, but you can capture that. You can capture that passion, like, you know, in video and things like that. And also if you're looking at, say, developing a blended course, so a combination of online and in person, one of the things I love about online learning is that it frees up the teacher to do that stuff that they're passionate about and that they're energetic about, you know. It kind of breaks my heart when you see an expert who's got, you know, years of experience and probably amazing stories to tell, and they're stuck at the front of a lecture hall talking through a PowerPoint on really basic terms and concepts, and you think, what a waste. We can put that online and then they can do the stuff that they're passionate about, you know, and it's such a better experience. What about you, Adam?
I'm going to do two quick ones.
Okay.
One is a bit of a pet peeve of mine when you are learning about accessibility or social disability, and it could be a slide on dyslexia, on a white background, and umpteen different bullet marks, and just can be overwhelming. I think, why are we talking about this stuff? And I'm learning about this stuff and not making it accessible to the very diversity that we're talking about, for goodness sake.
Yep.
So that's one. Second one, really quickly, is when I have e-learning, I use a screen reader. I can process text a hell of a lot quicker by listening. When you can't flip in hard text and on the e-learning, you can't actually read it. It's so frustrating, so badly designed.
Yep, absolutely, yeah. And when we were talking before about whether anything can be fully accessible, I didn't get a chance to say this, but I think giving people choices, you know, if anything could be fully accessible, it would be something that you could give people control over, so that if they prefer to listen, find that easier, they've got the option. You know, it's not one size fits all.
And it's game changing.
Absolutely.
I think if we tie into the workplace, if people are being onboarded, not my favourite terminology, you know what I mean. If e-learning is a big part of that, and it's not accessible, and it's not inclusive, I think it sends a message. It's maybe actually that this workplace is not for me.
Absolutely, yeah.
Well, because thank you very much for that. Like, and of course, thank you for coming on, because I've certainly learned a lot from listening.
Thank you.
It's okay.
It's been really good fun. Thanks.
And if the people watching have learned a lot from this episode and would also like to share it among their community, then please do. And as ever, if you would like to learn more, then please check out the best practice portal. thank you for joining us in Community Corner, and we shall see you all very soon.